Hey everyone, my name's Amit. I'm one of the co founders here at Mantle. I'm thrilled to be joined by Steve Trieu, who is the CFO of 8090 Solutions. We're going to dig into Steve's perspective as a CFO, helping startups, sharing actionable advice specifically around equity, fundraising, finances, and more. If you're an early stage founder trying to navigate cap tables, issue stock options, or just figure out your first round of funding, this episode is going to be packed with insights you don't want to miss. Steve, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm sure, like our audience, we're excited to jump right in. But before we do that, could you give us a quick overview of 8090 and your role as CFO?
Sure. 8090 is a company. We're about a little bit over a year old. And, we're primarily focused on helping larger companies as well as some, mid-sized companies really leverage some of the AI tools and sort of automate some of the processes that traditionally has required folks human labor. Quite frankly, not a good way to, no other good way to put it. Engaged in extremely repetitive tasks, right? So how can they automate that and how can they leverage some of the AI tools that are available out there? So we build essentially custom software that increases their efficiencies across these, functions that are repeated on a routine basis.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And how long has 8090 been around?
We've been around a little bit over a year, and it's been quite the journey. Grown from essentially a team of about 4 or 5 folks to now almost 30 folks in the last, call it 14 months or so. Very exciting, lots and lots of growth.
Awesome. Great to hear. So now we'll sort of get into some of the mindset pieces that startup founders should be thinking about, especially when they deal with fundraising, finances, and more. So one of the most common questions we often get is how soon is too soon? So this comes to everything, cap tables. When should I hire my first employee? When should I hire my first whoever, CXO, let's call it. But what would be helpful here is if you could share your perspective on when should a startup be thinking about hiring a CFO?
I think my situation is somewhat unique. 8090 Solutions obviously is a social capital affiliated company. And I wear a number of hats at Social Capital, including the group CFO role. I've been, a senior finance person in the industry, across a number of companies throughout my career. Um, I would say we were probably not your typical startup, right? Sort of how we were first founded. So my intuition is it's probably too early, quite frankly, for most companies to hire someone with a CFO title for quite a number amount of time, actually. Probably not until your series maybe A or even B.
Interesting.
It's probably unnecessary because a lot of the administrative role or a lot of the role is a little bit more administrative in the beginning. Certainly, I think if you have a founder that has not their first startup or has a supporting cast that has some of the more organizational background, then I think it's probably unnecessary to have a CFO that early on.
It's good insight, and that's helpful to know. So, quick follow up there is when a startup does think about bringing on a CFO, and let's say they've got to a point where maybe their processes are falling apart at the seams. What are what are some of the things they should look for?
I think sort of the way I would sort of peel this onion is when you first are a young nascent company, people have to wear many different hats. You were probably the person who was in there coding. You were also the person dealing with employees. You were the person dealing with potential investors. But as the company grows, what you quickly realize is that you typically want the best people and you want the people to identify these best people and what their superpower is. And in the role of, I think, a CEO or a technical CTO type founder, handling a lot of the fundraising, handling a lot of, dealing with the board, handling, how to think about financing the company over the long run is not their superpower. So I wish there was a magic breakpoint. I don't think there actually is, right? I think it's really how quickly is the company growing and how quickly do they need to make these types of decisions? And obviously, the faster the company grows, the likely that they will have to face some of these questions, such as, when should I raise my really first priced round where an investor may take, an active board seat? When are we going to take potentially substantially dilutive amount of capital? How do we finance this business? Is equity the only way? How do we finance the next, call it 2 or 3x in headcount growth? So those are like, I think probably some early indicators of when, hey, that's probably when I should think about a more senior finance executive to come in to help me think and quite frankly, take those things off my plate.
That's a good answer. I think that's the type of strategic thinking that a lot of founders may not have because, to your point, they may have a technical background, maybe a sales or a marketing background, and it's not a world they're sort of familiar with or steeped in. All that being said, I agree with you. Early days, founders have to wear multiple hats. That being said, what is the one thing you wish founders still kept in mind as it relates to constructing some good financial hygiene?
I think one thing lots of places do is they worry about some of the softer things. One of them being actually equity on it, right? Like they start thinking about that later than they should. And they tend to not have a long term view of how they should allocate equity, right? Or even, and I would say more broadly compensation. And as you know, like if I think about compensation, I usually think about it both as a motivator as well as a retention tool. And sort of like how do you turn that dial between the two? And equity and cash comp, and quite frankly, performance based comp are three different levers that can be used together. So when you sort of set precedents along these compensation tools, I think the more one offs that you do, or ones that where you don't think long term, it makes it a little bit harder to, I think, align the organization over the long run. And then you create folks where there's this feeling of like, hey, I'm in an unfair position or I'm not getting paid, with enough equity or cash or whatnot. And I think that creates probably a lot of unnecessary, I think, agita over the long run. So the hygiene I would tell most founders is have sort of opinion on how you want to sort of construct the program over the long run and try to stick with it, right? And but be flexible because the market does change. But if you have a principled way and a long-term view and you start early, I think that would probably prevent a lot of down the line adjustments, as I would say it.
That's a really nice way of putting it because we see this by the hundreds, like cap tables that need a recap, that need, let's just call it, pretty intense surgery to bring back into a good state. Um, and I think that's one of the cautionary tales we repeat when people ask us, "Is it too soon to get capital platform? Is it too soon to start thinking about some of this stuff?" And I
Yeah.
think to your point, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would say it's never too soon. I mean, I've been at a number of companies, some that have gone public, and part of the going public process is, something called equity remediation. If you think about a company's history since inception, maybe it's an early employee, maybe it's a consultant, maybe it's a friend or a buddy or a neighbor that you said you were going to give something to, and it was via an email, and it was never, brought onto the cap table. So I think, getting organized, especially around ownership early on is super important. So
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. This plays neatly into like effectively what are all the things you need to think about as you enter a financing round. So let's say you're an early stage startup, maybe you're pre-seed funded, angel funded, friends and family, etc. You're thinking about a seed round. When you enter into those conversations, and let's assume the networking game is on point, you're meeting the right VCs, etc. What's one of the key pieces that founders are missing, like they're overestimating or underestimating when it comes to that fundraising preparation?
I think the thing that most founders underestimate is that price is not as important, quite frankly. I think in the early round, I would say, especially at the seed round, because a lot of that I think is typically punted to a later round. And if you can construct something where it is more, I think safes are very prevalent nowadays, and you can set some sort of valuation cap where they convert. I think that's a good way to really sort of punt on that valuation until, there is a real priced round. So I think I wouldn't spend too much necessarily on like what the company is worth, because at this point in, I think most companies' life cycle early on, it's really the class of investors or the group of investors are people who believe in the idea, right? And they believe in the possibility, right? So you either have people who believe that this is a worthy sort of journey that you're embarking on, or it's not. At some point, that will change, right? Typically, in your call it C round ish, you'll start to have to show me it's not just a dream, right? Show me results, show me cash flow, show me EBITDA. So I would say most founders, I think, typically churn or spend a lot of time thinking about like, oh, this that doesn't seem like a fair valuation, whatnot. I think at that point in the beginning, it's probably more important to focus on like, do you have the right sort of investors, quite frankly, that believe in your journey, that believe in you? Because ultimately, you're trying to build something and find product market fit at that point, right? So having those folks who believe in that story or believe in that journey is more important.
The vision is effectively what you're selling in the early round. That makes perfect sense. At some point, things get real. And then, like you said, the financials are going to come out. So, how should a founder be thinking about constructing those financials, specifically their models, right? Like if they're trying to show some kind of a projection, right? Like what's a good thought process into like figuring out revenue projections and such that you want to showcase to future investors?
I've seen a lot of presentations, and people always start with like how big the TAM is, and like if we got the percentage of the TAM, we'd be a massive company and be worth billions and billions of dollars.
1%. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other hats I wear is on the venture side. So like everyone has these, right? And that's fine. You want to inspire people. You want to tell them that you are going after an important market. But at the end of the day, sitting on the other side, as someone's written checks, is thinking about, hey, do I believe in what you're trying to build? Is it important? The other part is really my question usually comes to like, when is your time to next check? When
Mm.
is how long am I buying you sort of oxygen for before you have to go and have somebody else re-underwrite this? So I think the super long view is important, and then sort of I think intermediate view is just as important. And what I think the mistake a lot of people do is like they give this is the 3-year view or the 4-year view or the 5-year view, and like quite frankly, probably starting in year 2, projections are wrong, right? So tell me what it is in the next 6 months. Tell me what it is in the next 12 months. Like what is your cash needs as in terms of staffing, cash needs in terms of buying tokens or getting AWS or whatnot. Like, and where does that get you? And sort of like what's the next quantum of capital that you'll actually have to raise? You know, and I think that helps ultimately people size their bets, right? They're like, hey, I'm buying essentially a 12-month, 24-month quantum of capital, and I expect this types of results. And it might not be like cash flow. It might be like, hey, you're gonna be in market, you're gonna have a product that's viable, right? That works, right? That you've been able to recruit. So if you can put somewhere more like I think tangible sort of milestones that aren't necessarily all financial related. Of course, they all translate back into a financial model, but like I think that's where people should focus their time on. And then at that point, it's like, hey, we think we would be ready to raise another round, right? Another priced round. And we think because we have accomplished these n number of things, there will be a valuation lift of X, right? And that helps the person size the check and size the amount of risk that they're taking on.
It's the migration from fiction to something tangible as they
Absolutely.
try and convert. No, that makes sense. If we did like one question retrospective on the 80-90 path in terms of your fundraising experience? Is there anything you do differently? Are there any sort of lessons learned or any surprises going through that process?
I would say it was quite a successful round. Having Chamath as our one of our co-founders helps a lot, and his network, and also having some folks I think that you've known for many years as also as co-founders helps a lot. I wouldn't say the comment is necessarily 80/90 specific. I would say is probably more broad. Thinking about how much money you want to raise as a function of like how much runway you want to buy is sort of I think the first layer of the onion. If we go back to the onion thing, the other one, and this is not again not 80/90 solution specific. I think this is across the board of all startups. Is like raising just enough money so that you feel that you're under pressure, right? Is actually I think in the long run more helpful than raising too much money, quite frankly. Right? Because when you raise too much money, I think you tend to you tend to have more fat. You tend to have more time. You tend to, hire folks who command a larger salary, but in terms of like output, who knows? Maybe hiring someone more junior might be more hungry. I think it's a delicate balancing act. So what I guess I would say is like raise a quantum of cash where you think you have enough oxygen to support the business until the next major milestone, but no more. Right? Don't try to raise too much. The other part of this is like if you fail, well, at least you didn't burn too much money, right? And if in success, raising money will not be a problem, right? If people execute, getting more money is not the problem, right? But there's that middle part where people tend to raise a little bit too much and, they have five different types of coffee and everybody gets yoga at 4 o'clock. Then that becomes, I think, it can be counterproductive is probably the best word for it.
I've heard that somewhere else as well. The idea of like, oh, things get too comfortable, and then there's it could be a performance hit, but then you also want a baseline level of comfort. To your point earlier, which is like, well, at a minimum, compensation needs to be in a good place. Otherwise, that just becomes a primary distraction to unlock the all of your talent. But those are some strong points. You've touched upon the equity piece, but I'm curious, like, how did you think about managing 80/90's cap table prior to signing up for Mantle? What kind of systems have you used in the past? What worked well? And what's changed since you adopted Mantle?
Yeah, so I don't want to date myself too much, but I've used a number of platforms over my entire career, right? Everything from completely outsourced to lawyers, which tends to be extremely expensive, to a hybrid type model to I think Carla is and now more recently with Mantle. And I would say by far Mantle is was probably the best fit for us. It was, you know, early on you really just want a record keeper, right? Like you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, right? Like, um, someone once said to me, which I thought was salient, which is like, we're in the business of building, technology companies. We're not in the business of reinventing how cap tables should be managed or how equity should be given, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel there. Right. So I think early days compensation, especially on the equity side, you don't have to reinvent that wheel. It's pretty vanilla, right? And you know, it's a single class usually at the early company, which is all common. You have some potential founder shares and then call it employee type shares, but they're all common shares. So I don't think you really need anything more than something like a mantle. And Ahmed, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but like in my prior lives, I've managed this in Excel too, right? Not the best tool, I will tell you, definitely not the best tool, especially when you want to have a repository of like where are all the signed documents, right? So anyways, I I really think like, you know, don't overcomplicate things. And of course, as the company grows and as you hire more senior folks who might have special packages, then you can cross that bridge there. But right now, Mantle's been great to us.
That's salient advice. And one of the free tools we've shipped is the ability to grade your cap table spreadsheet. Because, common question we get all the time is, well, I have a spreadsheet. It's good enough. I'm like, you don't have to take my word for it. Use our online tool. We don't collect any data. You can anonymize the information if you have to. Check out what it says about your cap table spreadsheet. And to your point, one of the biggest things it's going to flag is the fact that how's your cap table tied out? Where are those documents, right? Like every row in your spreadsheet, every number should ideally be backed by something. And I think once that gets apparent, then
Yeah.
people tend to adopt. Yeah.
The other thing I would say is like cap table management is a two-sided coin, right? Like people tend to think about it as like, okay, the finance or legal or HR, whatever department, G&A department manages it and they keep it. And they're supposed to have all the paperwork saved neatly into some, repository somewhere, right? But I think if we go back to where we sort of began this conversation, is like it's part of compensation, it's part of retention. So having the ability for an employee to log in at any time and see what their grant is and see what the potential value is and see how much they vested and understand how they are on their progression of that vesting is, I think, super important, right? And actually it takes a lot of administrative overhead off the shoulders of like someone in finance, for example, right? Like, can you pull me my latest report? Like, good luck, right? And when you multiply that by, 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 employees, right? Plus. So that's actually something that's been really great with Mantle, which is like, here, go to equity.mantle.com and you can look it up yourself. And you can see which grants you've accepted and all the paperwork and how much you invested.
That was one of our motivators as well, which is part of Mantle offering unlimited stakeholders is exactly trying to tackle that problem, which is you don't want hundreds of stakeholders emailing the finance person, the HR person, or whoever and being like, where's my grant? Where's it at? How much have I vested? Like all of this should be readily accessible, including the documents that back it up. So we don't punish companies for growing in that way. You mentioned you also like you're obviously, very deeply steeped in the venture ecosystem. Are there common mistakes you see when other founders deal with their cap table or their equity or issuing options or whatever?
The most non-obvious mistake that ends up biting people in the behind later on is when they've promised somebody something, right?
Yep.
And the other party says, hey, I have evidence of this. You fast forward 5, 10 years later or whatever the timeline is, and the people who were working at the company might be very different than the people who were there previously, or you don't remember what happened 10 years ago, right? And all of a sudden this impacts not just you, but all of your employees, all of your investors. And, that could be a delicate situation to try to, unravel, right? Or put back together. And that can get quite messy. So I think that's one. The other one is probably like, we see this, I'm sure lots of founders see this as different vesting schedules, right? That could be also messy, right? Somebody who is either a consultant or an advisor or somebody who, you know, you've had some sort of agreement with that they're going to bring a ton of value to you to this one specific launch or feature on that you're trying to build, and they have a different vesting schedule. Like and the varieties, I wish I can count them on two hands, but I can't. Right? There are lots and lots of different flavors and varieties of this. So like trying to manage that outside of a system and or via email or memory or Excel is just not scalable, right? So I think that's probably the two areas I would pinpoint, which is like stuff you potentially forgot about and then stuff that you've gone exotic about. So those two, I think, usually are things that in the moment was a good idea, probably was a good idea in the long run, but then you forgot about it. Then it becomes a problem. So
Yeah, we've definitely seen examples of those, especially when it comes to performance based vesting. So we have a whole write up on it. But generally speaking, will advise founders to think about their milestones at a macro level, like big milestones, major wins for your company. That's obviously worth it. But then we'll see micro level milestones that are sort of based on hours worked or hours billed or something to that effect, where what vesting tranches are going to look a little strange, right? So, yeah, I'm with you on that. I think keeping things simple early on is so key. Otherwise, software or not, things can get just very messy, right? This has been fantastic. Any sort of final words of wisdom for founders who should be thinking like a CFO before we close?
Again, I think obviously the founders they take the hard step, which is most people would not take, which is that leap, right? And hey, I'm going all in. So hats off to them. And you know, I would encourage more folks, especially young folks who now have a plethora of tools that were not available to folks like us when we were their age to make that leap, right? To actually make a bet on yourself, especially if you're sort of early to the middle of your career. So I'm a huge proponent of that. And the other sort of piece of this is like, don't worry so much about, how much is this worth and how much is that worth too much in the beginning, right? Focus on making a product that works and delivering it. I've never found a good product that was unable to find money, right? Like that is not the problem. It's finding enough people to build good products is usually the bottleneck. So I don't know if that's advice for any specific founders, more just I think encouraging folks to take that risk and help build this ecosystem of I think innovation for us as society, as humanity.
Love it. I think it makes a lot of sense because, to your point, the focus should be on building, creating value, and then the economics will work themselves out. Obviously, it's not going to be automatic, but to your point, people don't need to overthink it before you've kind of proven product or a service or whatever it is, right? Love that. Thank you again, Steve. You've been very generous with your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Ahmed. Great being here.